Good morning, everyone. A couple of weeks ago, there was a thing that happened in Australia that happens every year, and it's called NAPLAN. So if you're in grade 3 or 5 or 7 or 9, you know what I'm talking about. Or if you're a parent who's had a child in those grades, you know what I'm talking about. It's a standard test that happens all over the country, and they test everyone. No matter what school you're in, no matter what the conditions are, you get the same test. You get tested on your literacy and numeracy and some other things. And it's what they call standardised testing, which means that everybody gets the same test. So if you're at the local public school here in Drayton, you get the same test as the people at the hoity-toity private school down in Melbourne. Right? Everybody gets the same test no matter where you are, no matter who your teacher is, no matter what your background is. And they try to analyse who does the tests here and what scores they get, and who does the tests there and what scores they get. And standardised tests can be helpful, but they're extremely unfair, aren't they? To give everyone the same test when people have had such different backgrounds and such different experiences. I mean, some people are raised in a good, healthy, functioning household where they've read books and they are instructed in how to do their homework, and they're helped along. And then there are other kids who are in foster care, and they don't have anyone to read books to them, and they don't have anyone to help guide them. There are some children in this country who have private tutors from when they're a toddler, and there are others who are barely scraping by, barely able to get to school. Here's some good news for you. God does not do standardised tests. He doesn't give everyone the same test and say, well, you all have to do it, and I'm going to judge you all by the same test. What's very clear when we read Scripture is that God will not give you the same test that He will give the person who's sitting next to you today. God tests each one of us, not just one big, broad, wholesale test, but He will find a test for your life and my life that is appropriate to us, that is not too much for us, that is just right to be able to prove our faith and strengthen our faith without collapsing our faith. What wonderful news that is. Because sometimes when you read the Bible, you read about people like Job, and he lost his kids, and he lost his money, and he lost all his possessions, and then he lost his health, and you think, I don't know if I could deal with that kind of test. I don't know if my faith could endure all of that. Guess what? It doesn't have to. God isn't giving you Job's test. Job gets Job's test. You get your test, and I get my test. You read through Hebrews 11 and you see some were stoned, some were beaten, some were sawn in two, and you think, I don't know if I could do that. You don't have to worry about their tests. You don't get their tests. You get your test. And God has promised that whatever my test is and your test is, He will provide a way of escape. He will not allow you to face any test, any temptation that is beyond your ability. God is faithful. 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13. So as we read this passage today, we see a test that Daniel goes through. And it's a test for him. It's not for you. You get your own test. After we leave here today, you go back out into the world. We're all going to have our own test. And I don't know what your test is going to be, but I want you to focus this morning on how Daniel is not alone through this test. God is not giving him a test and saying, well, you know, your time starts now. Hand it in at the end of the day. God is with him through this test to help him and strengthen him. On Mondays is my day off, and so this Monday I took our boys to Queen's Park. Have you guys seen the play equipment at Queen's Park there? It's fantastic. They've got this huge big structure, and it's probably as tall as the ceiling here. You climb up on one side, there's ropes and nets, and you have to climb up, and then there's this huge tunnel that goes along the sky, and you have to climb through the tunnel, and then it comes down, there's a big slide on the other side. And I took our boys there, and Ollie, he wanted to do it, and so the first time he went up, and it's probably a bit too big for him. He's pretty small still, and some of the gaps are quite large, and so he was struggling a few parts, and it took him a while to kind of climb up. And a few places he called down to me and said, "I'm stuck. I need your help." And I said, "Oh, I'm not getting up there, are you?" You can do it. And he found a way. But anyway, he got over. He got through it. He came down the slide on the other side, and I celebrated with him. And he said, "Now, please, can you come up with me?" And well, it doesn't say no adults on the thing, right? And so I said, all right, I'll come up with you, because if you can do it, I can do it too. And so I went up with him, and he climbed up. And guess what? He was twice as fast at climbing up. And I didn't help him. I didn't hold him. I didn't push him. I didn't touch him. I didn't give him instruction on what to do. And when he got to the top, you know what he said? I wrote it down because I thought this is going in my sermon on Sunday. He said, "It's funny why I'm stronger when you're with me." And not that I did anything to him, I was just with him that time. And if we can just have that, same confidence about our God, it's funny why I'm stronger when he's with me. And no matter what tests you and I are going to face this week, we're going to do so confidently. We're going to do so with full conviction. I can do it because God is with me. Let's get into our text this morning. We're looking at this in 3 sections. Daniel's conviction in the first few verses, Daniel's courage, and Daniel's calling. Let's read Daniel chapter 1, verses 8 through 10 again. It says, "But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favour and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, 'I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than these youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king.'" When we picture this scene, it's hard to imagine yourself in the shoes of Daniel. You remember we looked at this last week. Daniel has been taken from his home, from his family, from the place where he feels comfortable. He's been marched for 3 months over the Fertile Crescent, this pathway through strange cultures and through strange cities, through places where they don't speak your language, they don't do the things that you do at home. And he finally shows up in Babylon. About 100 years ago, there was a German archaeologist who was looking for Babylon. He was digging for it, and he found it in Iraq, in modern-day Iraq. And he found the gate that you go in to get to Babylon. It was still there, just buried underground, and he was able to dig it up, and he got all the bricks from the gate, and he sent them back to Germany, where he was from. And in the Berlin Museum, you can go there today, and you can see they've reconstructed the gates of Babylon, and this is what they look like. They're called the Ishtar. It's the Ishtar Gate. So this is reconstructed almost fully with the original bricks. They had this incredible blue glaze to the bricks. So as you're walking through the brown wilderness and desert, you suddenly come to Babylon, and 15 meters tall is this enormous gate. You can see how small the people are down the bottom. That's the gate that Daniel would have walked through, entering into Babylon for the first time. And you can see what's on the gate, can't you? There's animals there. There's dragons representing the Babylonian god Marduk. There's lions representing the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, goddess of love and of war. And there's some bulls there as well, representing Adad, the storm god. When he walks through these gates, he knows he's entering into hostile territory, doesn't he? He knows that this isn't just a secular place where you can choose whatever religion you want, you're free to practice whatever religion you please. No, in Babylon, these are the gods now. In Babylon, you worship these gods, and all through the streets, they're lined with images of the gods of Babylon. All through the temples, there's images of the gods of Babylon. He knows right from the gate that he's entering into a war zone. He's an exile, and And everything he does in this city, he's going to face this constant pressure to bow down to the gods of Babylon. Turn with me to 1 Peter. Turn with me to 1 Peter chapter 2 and look at Peter's instruction for us Christians today. 1 Peter chapter 2, I'm going to read verse 11. First Peter 2:11 says, "Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles." That's what we are. That's what Daniel was. He was an exile. He was taken away. He was in a foreign land. That's what we are as well, according to Peter. As sojourners and exiles, to abstain from the passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul. Brethren, you know that you're in a war zone. We know that we're in enemy territory. We know that we live in Babylon, don't we? We live in a culture that is hostile, that has gods of its own. They might not have statues of idols on the corner of our streets, but certainly the billboards that we see and the advertising that we see show us what the gods of our culture are. We're in enemy territory. And look at what Daniel does. He resolves in his heart, or he purposes in his heart. You see, he doesn't wait until the temptation comes. He doesn't say, "Oh well, I think this is fine. I think I'll be fine in Babylon." He, from the get-go, he makes a resolution that he's not going to defile himself while he's in Babylon. There's a famous preacher from hundreds of years ago, in the early 1700s. His name was Jonathan Edwards, and when he was a teenager, he made a list of 70 resolutions. And every week in his life, he would read through the 70 resolutions. Let me read to you just a couple of these. Resolution number 1. I am resolved that I will do whatsoever I think to be most to God's glory. Resolution 31. I'm resolved never to say anything at all against anybody, except when to do so is perfectly consistent with the higher standards of Christian honour and love to mankind, and except when it is consistent with the sense of greatest humility and awareness of my own faults and failings. Resolution 43, he says, never from this day until I die will I act as if I were in any way my own, but entirely and altogether belonging to God and living in a way that's true to that reality. He was a teenager and he made resolutions to live by. Let me ask us all, have you made your resolutions? Wise people don't wait until temptation and trials come before they start making resolutions. They're already resolved in their heart what they're going to do, so that when the temptation and the tests come, they've already decided. What resolutions have you made? In the workplace, have we resolved that we'll hold fast to our moral integrity regardless of promotions and paychecks? If we're not married, have we resolved in our heart that we will stay sexually pure until we're married? If we are married, have we resolved not to look at another? If we're in an environment where people are using bad language, if we're in an environment where people are antagonistic to God, have we made a resolution that we are going to keep our language pure and uplifting as God wants us to? If we use the internet, have we made a resolution that we will not be using it to gossip or to slander or to hurt others or any malicious purposes? Before you walk through the gates of Babylon, have your resolutions. I think it's a good practice. If you don't feel like you've got resolutions in your life, then maybe this afternoon, sit down with pen and paper and make a list. What are my resolutions that I live by? Because Daniel knew his resolution was very simple. He resolved that he wouldn't defile himself. That word defile, it means to stain. He didn't want to become stained. And he knew that Babylon was a place where there was lots of material that could stain him. This week we sat down for dinner, the spaghetti bolognese. And you know when you're sitting down to spaghetti bolognese, you have to be very, very careful because very quickly you can stain your favourite shirt and lose it forever. There's some environments where you know there is high risk of stain. Now, any environment that we're in, we can sin, right? You can sin sitting in a church building, you can sin in your home, in your very bed. But there are going to be some environments that I go into where the risk of staining is especially high. And the resolution that Daniel made at that point was, I'm not going to let them stain me. So the first test that came up was food. He was offered food from the king's table. I don't know what it was about this food. Some scholars think it was not kosher. You know, the Jews had their laws from Leviticus 11, 12, 13 about what food they could and couldn't eat. Maybe the food violated those food laws. Or maybe it was that the food had been offered to idols. We're not told exactly what it was about the food, but there was something about the food where Daniel thought, that food is going to stain me, and I just can't eat it. This would have happened right at the start, wouldn't it? This is maybe the first day in Babylon. He was sitting down for his first meal probably, and he faces his first test. And I'm sure that there would have been people around him that said, just forget about the food. Just eat the food, right? Choose your battles. Choose what hill to die on. Don't die on this hill. You've just walked 3 months to Babylon. Just eat the food and be okay with it. But Daniel had already decided. He'd already resolved what he was going to do. And so as soon as the food was put in front of him, he knew he couldn't eat it. So he goes and he talks to the chief of the eunuchs and says, I can't eat this. I can't eat this food. And you can imagine what the chief of the eunuchs thought. What are you talking about? This is Babylon. You don't make the rules. You don't get to decide what you eat. You're a conquered, captive exile. Nebuchadnezzar's in charge here. He gets to decide what you eat and what you don't eat. And so Daniel doesn't argue. He doesn't insult. He doesn't protest. He very calmly responds in courage with a test. Let's look at that in our next section, verse 11 through 16. It says, Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. Daniel handles this situation not just with courage, but also with grace and gentleness. You remember what Peter says when he's talking about Jesus? When he was reviled, he did not revile. When he was insulted, he did not return, he did not threaten, but he continued entrusting himself to his faithful Creator. 1 Peter 2 and verse 23. Daniel responds gently, but firmly. And when you look at this text, you can't help but ask the question, how did he know that this was going to work? He didn't. As far as I can tell, he didn't know that it was going to work. He'd never faced this challenge before. He'd spent his whole life in the royal palace in Jerusalem. He'd never had to worry about food. He'd never had to think about eating just vegetables. He was facing a challenge for the first time. And really, he couldn't be certain what was going to happen. You know what happens in a few chapters' time from now? When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are told to bow down to the statue, or else they'll be thrown into the fiery furnace. And what do? They don't bow down. And you ask the question, well, how did they know that they would be saved from the fiery furnace? They didn't know. They say that in the text in chapter 3, verses 17 and 18. They say, our God can save us, but if not. They say he might not. It might not work. We might not be saved. But I'm going to do the right thing anyway. They didn't necessarily know what would happen if they did the right thing, but they knew what would happen if they did the wrong thing, and that was enough. They knew that if they did the wrong thing, they would compromise their faith. They would lose their opportunity to declare God's faithfulness and power to the king of Babylon. They would abandon their God. Brian Chappell, he's a teacher at a Bible college in the USA. He wrote a book, and it's called Standing Your Ground. And he has this story in his book. At this Bible college where he teaches at, there was a man who was coming along, and the reason why he could come to the Bible college was because his wife worked in this medical research facility, and her job was quality assurance officer. And she was paying his way through Bible college. And their whole setup required her to be earning the money that she was on. And then one day, there's a problem at the facility where all of the syringes get contaminated. And it's a huge blunder. And it costs millions of dollars. And she's the quality assurance officer, so she has to sign off to say these syringes are safe and they've passed the test. But that would be a lie. And her boss came to her and said, I need you to sign those forms because we can't afford to throw out that shipment of syringes. And he says, if you don't sign it, then tomorrow, I'm not sure that you have a job. Well, what does she do? Because her job is getting her husband through Bible college. That's a good thing, right? Surely God would want her to keep working so that he can keep on studying, so that in the end it'll be good. This Brian Chappell, who was telling the story, he finished it like this. He said, for this young couple, all the theological jargon and the doctrinal instruction about consecration and righteousness and holiness suddenly came down to this one concrete decision. Can you afford to remain undefiled from the contamination of the world, of business practicalities? Can you remain undefiled? Karen doesn't know what will happen if she does the right thing, but she knows what will happen if she does the wrong thing. And she trusts God with the rest. So she goes in the next day and she does the right thing. She says, I can't sign the form. And they fire her. And she loses her job. And they go through a lot of struggle trying to get by. Is that fair? It's not fair. But she did the right thing and she entrusted herself to God. I tell you this because in Daniel's story it turns out well. But Daniel's story is the exception, it's not the rule. Oftentimes people do the right thing in this life and they do not get away with it. Oftentimes people decide they won't compromise and they get punished for it. We may lose our jobs, we may suffer the consequences for doing the right thing in this life. Daniel chose to put it to the test, and he didn't know what would happen. Maybe the test would fail, maybe he'd get his head chopped off, but he chose to do the right thing anyway. But God had a plan for Daniel, and that's what we get to in this last section, Daniel's calling. God protected Daniel because he had a plan for his life. In verse 17 to verse 21, it says, as for these 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king spoke with them. And among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king. And in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the 1st year of King Cyrus. You notice the phrase that's used there? It's actually used 3 times in this chapter. God gave. It says it in verse 17 there. As for these youths, God gave. They're not on their own, are they? They've never been on their own. Right back in chapter 2, it says, the Lord gave Jerusalem into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. It was God who did that. God was in charge on the battlefield that day. What else did God give? In verse 9, God gave Daniel favour and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. When Daniel protested about the food and he had to go to the boss, the chief of the eunuchs could have said, off with your head. You have no power here, Daniel. But God intervened and he made sure that the chief of the eunuchs was compassionate and gave favour to Daniel. And then finally here in verse 17, God gave them understanding and learning and skill. Why? Why did God give them all of that? Because God's got a plan. That's what we looked at last week. I have a plan for you, for future and for a hope. And he's getting his plan done. When you read Daniel chapter 1, it's easy to read it at first glance and go, okay, this is just a random history of what's happening in Babylon. It is not random history. It is the deliberate work of God to put people in the right place at the right time with the right skills to achieve his purpose. He's planned that all along and he's making it happen. And for the rest of this book, Daniel is going to be perfectly positioned to stand up for his faith and to tell the most powerful person on earth, you're not in charge, God is. Daniel could have looked back on his life and gone, that's so random, isn't it? It's crazy how it happened, so accidental, so coincidental that I got taken away from Jerusalem and then I got brought to Nebuchadnezzar's household, and then with the vegetables that the chief of the eunuchs just happened to be compassionate to me, and then I happened to be top of my class, and then I happened to be in this position. It's not happenstance. God put Daniel where he was and equipped him with abilities and opportunities so that Daniel could serve how God had planned. It was all very deliberate. It was all very purposeful. Now, can you not swap your name for Daniel there? Has God not put you where you are and given you the abilities and opportunities that he's given you so that you can serve God how he's planning? You can look back on your life and say, it's crazy that I ended up in Toowoomba. It's crazy that I ended up with the family I've got. It's crazy that I got the friends. Is it crazy? Or is there some deeper plan where God has equipped you and God has put you in a deliberate place so that you can serve him how he wants? When Paul is writing to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 8, listen to the times he says all in this verse. He says, God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. God has given you everything you need to do the good works that he's asking you to do. This is a poet and a songwriter by the name of Edith Clarkson. She wrote this beautiful poem. O Father, you are sovereign in all affairs of man. No powers of death or darkness can thwart your perfect plan. All chance and change transcending, supreme in time and space, you hold your trusting children secure in your embrace. God is sovereign over all. God has put Daniel where he wants him. He has equipped him with what he wants him equipped with to be able to fulfill his purposes. Or, as another poet said, a poet by the name of Oliver Smith, it's funny how I'm stronger when you're with me. Have our closing song now. Thanks, Andrew.